A desperate plea from a concerned Canadian. First off, let me acknowledge that this might be an unpopular opinion. I acknowledge that the general consensus is that Sami will and should fight Kevin Owens either at Elimination Chamber or WrestleMania. Perhaps I am the only one, but I strongly object to that storyline direction, so let me lay out my reasons as clearly as I can. Settle in, because we might be here a while. It reads like War and Peace. It's honestly keeping me awake at night, so this has therapeutic value. Maybe. The social landscape in Toronto and Canada right now. Currently, Canadian sports fans are booing the Star-Spangled Banner. That's not kayfabe. It's not hate either. It's love, and it's how one reacts when love has been rejected, taken for granted, or betrayed. It's a wound of significant impact, and it won't be easily forgiven. The mood in Canada right now is one of unity and defiance in the face of boorish entitlements and exceptionalism. Our patriotism is seldom seen, but it's fiercely passionate when challenged, and now simmering to the surface. Sami and Kevin's dynamic. It's a suspension of belief that escapes me, and I've seen them tell the story of betrayal and revenge a dozen times, it seems. And while we'd all love to see Sami and Kev scrap forever and it never gets old, I know in my heart of hearts that they love each other, might even die for one another, and I think therein lies the more compelling narratives. I know it's a work, I know they're colleagues and the dearest of friends crafting a script on the fly, and I can't get past that with these two. With CM Punk and Rollins, or Punk and Drew, or even Rollins and Reigns. It's easy for me to believe that they have a frosty relationship behind the scenes as well as in front of the cameras. And that's the beauty of blurring the lines between kayfabe and reality. But there's no way on earth I can imagine Sami and Kevin with backstage heat. Like Jimmy and Jay, I know they're just getting their mania moment, and so it lacks real juice. And I think that was probably part of the problem with Jimmy and Jay and why it was so poorly received. For me, and maybe no one else, I love both Sami and Kevin, and watching them fight right now would be like watching mom and dad fight. I've seen it enough, and now it's just depressing. What I really yearn to see is mom and dad standing up to the bossy neighbor. Sami's viewpoint. Let's think this through. His best friend, the last person to see him go through the curtain for his match against Gunther last year at WrestleMania, asked him for help. And Sami, to his credit, came down for the match between Kevin and Cody, and Sami showed concern for both men, but clearly seemed to favor Kevin and even encourage him. Then Sami had to watch helplessly as his best friend and compatriot was nearly decapitated. Sami's concern revved up to panic level as he rushed to Kevin's upside-down maybe corpse. Cody had tried to end his career, I can't even finish the thought. Sami probably had the same thought. For a moment, however brief, Sami may have believed that he might have lost his best friend forever. The emotional resonance of that belief would be deeply scarring and traumatic. Sami's motivation. My impression of Sami's kayfabe character is as follows. First, the negative. He's insecure, suspicious, naive, odd. The positive. Understanding, introspective, forgiving, loyal. What he's not. Independent, a backstabber, vengeful, shallow. After his own hesitancy and reluctance to get involved nearly cost Kevin and him dearly, only to discover that the relationship is forever damaged anyways, it's hard for me to accept that Sami's thoughts are focused on revenge, and that Sami's love is turned to hate. I find it much more believable and consistent with character to think that Sami is devastated, filled with sorrow and guilt, and in a recurring state of panic over losing Kevin and for all time. Kevin's viewpoint. He saw his life flash before his eyes while his lifelong companion watched. He's traumatized by the experience and partly blames Sami. You'd feel the same way if you were pushed onto train tracks and your partner was too scared to get involved. After narrowly escaping death, you'd likely be more mad at your partner than the person who pushed you. He's lashing out at the one he loves for taking him for granted. If I had to make a choice between Kevin and the American Nightmare, and I had to make that choice in front of a Toronto audience, well, that's no choice at all. But I'm Canadian. I have a bias. Doesn't Sami have a similar bias? Why doesn't Sami have a bias? I think that's what Kevin wants to know, and so do I. The Bret Hart connection. I'm reminded of a time almost 30 years ago when a bloodthirsty American audience whose values were slipping insisted two brotherly compatriots fight. And then Owen hugged Bret Hart and cried real tears, and Davy Boy and the Anvil joined them in fellowship, and the Hart Foundation was reborn, and Canadian flags waved, and it was magnificent. Bret became an icon in his home and native land, a hero to the voiceless and around the world, and a despised, dastardly villain in the good old US of A. I think Sami knows this story very well. His favorite wrestler is Bret Hart. The first live event he attended was the Screwjob. Audience interest. Nothing gets a bigger pop in front of a Canadian crowd than seeing these two hug it out. Beyond, they always have a banger and it's going to be brutal, what are the other reasons for wanting to see this match? One teaches the other a lesson, again, over hurt feelings. Isn't this terribly predictable and unimaginative and selling everybody short when there are so many layers here to work with? Everybody thought Kofi and Woods were going to split up, but what they ended up doing was way better received and much more creative. Maybe I give WWE too much credit. We'll see. I pose a hypothetical question. If you couldn't see the match, would you still want it to take place? A satisfying story narrative can be told as a story or acted out, but if we insist on seeing these two punch each other in the head over and over, can we not come up with a more noble reason? Conclusion. There's more than one American Nightmare on television, Canadian television screens. I may not be able to do anything about one of them, but I pray that Sami and Kevin, with glowing hearts, will unite against the other. It's becoming a kind of personal obsession. I feel like I'm on an island that's sinking, but it helps me relate to Kevin to feel so right and be so wrong at the same time. I'm going to send Sami some flowers and a Kevin is Right t-shirt for him at the hospital. I hope he wears it when he gets out. On second thought, screw the flowers. What am I, a psycho?